The Garmin Vivoactive 6 might be actually one of the most undervalued Garmin watches at the moment, at least in some regards. I've been using it for about a week and a half now, and I actually quite like this small Garmin watch. It's not perfect by any means, but compared to some other Garmin watches like the Venue X1, it's actually a great deal for the price. That's also saying something about the Venue X1 honestly, but more about that in a future video. In this video we're gonna scientifically and systematically test the Garmin Vivoactive 6. We're gonna test its heart rate tracking performance during different exercises, the sleep stage tracking performance, and we're gonna take a quick look at the GPS tracking. And I have to say, the Vivoactive 6 is definitely far from perfect. However, compared to the 3 times more expensive Venue X1 for instance, I really think this is the better deal, and I would buy this one myself over the Venue X1, even though the Venue X1 does have a bit more to offer, but not 3 times more. By the way, for those of you who are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. And you might be wondering why I'm not in my normal studio. I'm actually at work right now. I was wearing this device the whole day again and I really had some thoughts about it, so I wanted to share them with you. So because I had my thoughts really in order right now, I whipped out my camera, quickly recorded this introduction, but let's now quickly bike to the studio where we'll take a quick look at the specs of this Vivoactive 6. But the specs are not the most important thing, the testing is. And as you can see, many of the results are expected, some are unexpected, but they mostly show you that you don't always have to buy the most expensive device. Though you'll definitely have to think about how you can use this device in the best way. You might, for instance, also have to buy an external heart rate monitor in addition, which is generally something I recommend for people really into sports, and especially if you're using a Garmin device, because Garmin sometimes really struggle. But if you take care to use the strengths of the devices to your advantage and your priorities also align with those strengths, then a cheaper Garmin device can really be my best recommendation for some of you. So let's go to the studio. Okay, we're in my studio now. I analyzed all the data, and let's start by looking at the heart rate tracking performance. And specifically we'll start with indoor cycling, which is generally one of the easiest exercises for a device to track. So let's see if that's also the case for the Vivoactive 6. As always, we will use the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, this chest strap right here, as a reference because it can generally record my heart rate very accurately. ECG chest straps are in general the most reliable way of measuring your heart rate, so that's what we use as a reference, so let's get to it. As I said, we'll start with indoor cycling, and those results are displayed right here. Along the horizontal axis we have the heart rate as measured by the reference device. And along the vertical axis is the heart rate as measured by the Vivoactive 6, where if they would perfectly agree, all values, so all dots, should be along this blue line right here. And as you can see, luckily most points are on or at least close to the blue line, but there are still some points away from the blue line. That's why the correlation, this R value up here, is not super high at 0.89. It's probably at the border of being good enough, but 0.89 isn't quite as good as I would hope, and it's for instance not as good as we saw for the more expensive Garmin Forerunner 970, but that also uses a newer generation sensor. Still, this could be good enough, but I actually have some general recommendations for the Vivoactive 6 on how to use it, but I'll get to that later. Let's first take a look at the individual spinning sessions. And I did a total of 4 spinning sessions with the Vivoactive 6. With the reference plotted in blue-green and the Vivoactive 6 in red. And for this first session, there's basically perfect agreement with just some delays in picking up a decrease or increase in heart rate, but very minor. So this session would definitely be good enough. This second session actually has a shift in it. So I actually think this is because of the syncing of the device, which makes it actually look less good than it actually is. So it's better than expected. Here again, that time sync was fixed. But you can see on 2 occasions there was a slight delay in picking up on that increase in heart rate. And then finally this session also has perfect time sync. However, here in the beginning I had a dip in my heart rate where the Vivoactive 6 got confused. There was also a wrong spike here in my heart rate in the beginning. And again, sometimes a delay in picking up on a change in my heart rate. Overall still pretty good and good enough for me, but let's compare this to the competition. And in this overview right here, you can see how the Vivoactive 6 compares to the competition, where we use that correlation value we were looking at before, so that was 0.89 I believe, with the Garmin Vivoactive 6 marked in red right here, where the further to the top right a device is, the better is its correlation with the reference device. And as you can see, it's not among some of the better devices out there. However, it's also not amongst the absolute worst devices down here. But let's zoom in at least a little bit so we can read those labels better. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.8 or higher. And as you can see, the Vivoactive 6 is close to the Forerunner 255, but also the Vivoactive 5. And that makes complete sense, as the Vivoactive 5 and Vivoactive 6 basically have the same sensor still. So this should give similar performance. It's also close to, for instance, the older Garmin Instinct 2 and the Garmin Vivo Smart 5s. So close to a few other Garmin devices as well. And of course also the Garmin Forerunner 255 right here. Again, some of the best devices are up here. We actually have to zoom in to read those labels. So some of the best devices are different Apple Watches. Also the Pixel Watch 3 did quite well, and some Huawei devices are also doing really well. So those are really the best performers at the moment. So if you're purely going for heart rate tracking, at least for cycling indoors, those are the devices I would recommend. But let's next take a look at a different exercise, running. But before showing you those running results, since we're talking about running, if you're getting into running or you're already an avid runner and you want the best running plans out there that are customized to you to make sure you perform best for your 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon, whatever you have coming up, I recommend the Runner app. I use the Runner app myself to train for all my runs. It gives me a running plan because I have no idea how to make those, and it really sets those specifically for me at the pace that is good for me and the intensity that I need. So I can really recommend it. It also gives you live guidance during your runs. Now, if you want the best deal possible and you want to try out the Runner app for 2 weeks, you can do that using my affiliate link up here or down here. And that's one great way to support the channel. Now, if you want to support the channel in another way, you can become a member and you get early access to some of my videos. Quite a few of you have joined over the last few weeks, and this has been really helpful. It helps me buy expensive devices like this one and feel more secure in paying my editor Alex, for instance. And of course, it's always amazing if you can like this video, and if you haven't done so yet, to subscribe to the channel. There's also a bunch of other affiliate links in the description below, for instance to the best glucose monitoring app. I really like to find out which foods for me cause big glucose spikes, and I use the Levels app in combination with a continuous glucose monitor to get insights on what foods for me potentially influence my energy levels. So you can also find the best deal for that up here or down here. Enough about that. It would be great if you can support in some way, but back to the results. Now, I actually only went on a single run while I was testing the Vivoactive 6, and those results are here, where again the Vivoactive 6 is plotted in red. And most of the time it followed along quite well with the heart rate measured by the reference device, only again here was there a delay in picking up on an increase in my heart rate. So sometimes there appear to be some delays in changes in heart rate, at least on me. So that's not looking great. But of course, we can actually put a correlation value on this. And because of that delay, which are these points right here below the blue line, we now have a lower correlation value at 0.81, which isn't that great, honestly. Though with a single run, we do have to be careful with making definitive conclusions. But let's quickly compare this result to the competition. And in an ideal world, the Vivoactive 6 would be to the top right in this plot, but it's somewhere in the middle of all values. And compared to many of the other devices, it's actually not doing that great. It's doing actually similar to, for instance, the Fenix 7 Pro by Garmin, also not that far off from the Fenix 8. But of course, based on this single run, results tend to be a bit untrustworthy. So I expect it to be somewhere in this area right here, close to all the other Garmin watches. So it's actually not doing that much worse than, for instance, the Instinct 3, which actually has a newer sensor, I believe, but also the Forerunner 965 and the Fenix 8, which I mentioned before. So it's actually not doing that terrible compared to some other Garmin devices. But again, some of the best devices out there are different Apple Watches, some Huawei devices, and also the Pixel Watch 3. I forgot to put it in this plot, but the Pixel Watch 3 is also a great heart rate tracker. So it's again okay, but having some issues. But let's now make things a lot more difficult by taking a look at cycling outside. This has both bumpiness and a lot more tension on my arm, so let's have a look. And here we have that overview for biking outside, and this looks a bit better than I expected, honestly. The correlation is similar to running at 0.82, and most points are actually close to or on the blue line. Yes, there are these few points here below it, but often for Garmin I actually have a worse result. And I think that here actually the light weight of the Vivoactive 6 gives it some benefit, where it's much more stable on the wrist, giving it a much better chance at having a clean heart rate signal. So this looks okay actually, but let's take a look at the individual bike rides. And in the first bike ride we actually see quite a good agreement between the Vivoactive 6 and the reference device. There are some minor delays in picking up on changes in heart rate, but otherwise quite good. Also, this session isn't too bad, again, only minor deviations. Here in the beginning we have somewhat bigger deviations, but still not too bad overall. This session also looks really good, only this last session right here is a lot worse. Maybe here it was positioned less good on my wrist, or I don't know what's going on, but quite often it detected a way too low heart rate. But all the others honestly look quite good. But what if we compare these results to the competition? Well, this actually also isn't too bad. It's somewhere in the middle of all devices, and based on the individual examples we just saw, on many occasions it will be good enough. Still, there are definitely better devices out there, don't get me wrong, but it's not as bad as I somehow expected it to be. We can actually zoom in a little bit so we can see what devices it's close to. So here we have that zoomed in view, so these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.7 or higher. And again, it's close to many other Garmin devices with the same or a better sensor. So we have the Garmin Forerunner 255, the Venue 3, the Instinct 2, the Instinct 3, all of them are in the same area. It's actually not doing too bad considering its price, because many of these are a lot more expensive Garmin devices. Now, there are still better devices out there, for instance, Apple Watches, the Pixel Watch, Huawei devices, you get it. These are the best heart rate trackers out there. Also, my initial testing of the Galaxy Watch 8 and also the older Galaxy Watch 7 showed that with the firmware update, potentially they're doing better. Maybe by the time this video released, I already have done more testing, so maybe those results will change. But I would say, given that I know that Garmin devices struggle on me to track my heart rate, I expect it on other people for cycling outside, it might still be good enough. There are definitely better choices out there, but given the price, and if you care about being in the Garmin ecosystem, this actually isn't too bad considering the cost. And let's close off by looking at the hardest exercise for a device to track weightlifting. And you can see the results here, which are just not good. Basically, when I start a set of exercises, my heart rate increases. Usually it's then between, let's say, 100 and 140 BPM. And in those cases, when my heart rate increases, the Vivoactive 6 wasn't able to detect those increases. That's why there's so many points here below the blue line. This is what we typically see for Garmin watches. I'm not going to go into the details of the individual sessions or looking at the overview, because if you've even seen one review of Garmin devices that I've done, you will get the exact same result. Basically, the heart rate sensor and tracking of the Vivoactive 6 just isn't good enough to track your heart rate when you're doing a set of exercises with weightlifting. So I just wouldn't use it for that, unless you just want to measure your heart rate at rest in between the sets. This correlation of 0.62 is just really low. There are a few devices that get decent heart rate tracking during weightlifting, but in general, I recommend using an ECG chest strap. Okay, those results for heart rate tracking are okay, though we definitely see some issues of the Garmin Vivoactive 6. I think for basic heart rate tracking, for many of you, it might be good enough. Though my recommendation would be get yourself an ECG chest strap. They're not that expensive and you'll get the most reliable heart rate tracking while still being within the Garmin ecosystem. However, one thing you cannot replace with an ECG chest strap is the sleep stage tracking. Now, what is sleep stage tracking? Basically, throughout the night you go through different sleep stages. You might know them as REM sleep, deep sleep and light sleep. And different watches try to measure these sleep stages. They do it indirectly by measuring your heart rate variability, and then guesstimating what sleep stages you were in. And some of these are quite good and some of these are quite bad. So let's see how the Garmin Vivoactive 6 did in tracking your sleep stages. Now, sleep stages can be important, for instance, for getting a measure of your body battery or other things that somehow indicate how well rested and recovered you are from the night. So let's take a look at those results. The way we'll test that is by comparing the sleep stages as measured by the Vivoactive 6 to the Z-Max EEG headband, which is a specially designed headband that can measure brain waves and was specifically designed for sleep stage tracking. Now, it's also not perfect. It especially detects way too much awake time, so we're going to ignore awake time, but the other sleep stages are pretty reliable. So let's take a look at the results. And here we have that overview of the sleep stage results. Now, many regular viewers will know what this looks like, but just to quickly recap, on top we have the sleep stages as measured by the reference device, and on the left the Vivoactive 6. And if both would perfectly agree, all values on this diagonal should be 100%. Now, first, looking at deep sleep, we see that about 73% of what was deep sleep according to the reference device was also deep sleep according to the Vivoactive 6. So that's pretty good. Light sleep agreement is also pretty okay right here at about 67%. However, some was confused in this case with either deep sleep or REM sleep. However, the sleep stage that is by far the worst is REM sleep tracking. So of the REM sleep detected by the reference device, about 28% was also detected as being REM sleep by the Vivoactive 6. However, more than double that was instead predicted as being light sleep. And this is something we've seen in many Garmin devices. They're just not good at tracking your REM sleep. Now, in addition, there was also a lot of REM sleep detected that shouldn't have been REM sleep, especially when I was likely in light sleep. But because most of my night is actually light sleep, this 10% confusion of both REM sleep and deep sleep is actually quite significant. So this is actually roughly what I would expect from a Garmin device. But to show you that, let's put these results into a general overview of many of the devices I've tested in the past. And this is that overview, where again we want the devices to be as far to the top right as possible. So that's a simple explanation of this overview. But basically along the horizontal axis, we have the average agreement over the individual sleep stages. And on the vertical axis, we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage out of all of them. So again, that means the further to the top right the device is, the better is the agreement with the reference device. And the Garmin Vivoactive 6 is plotted in green right here. So the different colors indicate different reference devices. All devices are different EEG or PSG devices, so sort of silver and gold standard reference devices. And all devices marked in green were tested against the reference device we used in this video, so the ZMAX. And as you can see, the Vivoactive 6 is basically exactly where we expect it to be. So it's close to, for instance, the Garmin Instinct 3, the older generation Garmin Vivoactive 5, the Garmin Enduro 3, the Garmin Forerunner 970, and let's see any other Garmin devices right here. We have the Venue 2, and for instance, also right here, we have the Garmin Instinct 2. So all newer-ish Garmin devices are somewhere in this area right here. So in the middle of all devices. There are definitely worse devices out there. Some Chinese brands like Xiaomi and Huawei did worse on me than Garmin. However, there are quite a few better devices out there. Also some quite cheap devices. So the best 4 brands, as regular viewers will know, are 8Sleep, Aura, Sleep 2, also called Nucoa, and Apple. Those are really the 4 best brands out there at the moment. Now, if you're wondering what the 8Sleep is, the 8Sleep Pod is my favorite sleep improvement device. It can actually actively heat and cool each side of the bed independently, in addition to having great measurements of your sleep stages, your heart rate variability without wearing anything on your body. It's one of my favorite sleep improvement devices because I tend to sleep very hot, so I can really cool that side of the bed, and in summer it's the only way I can still sleep, because in Vienna it gets quite hot and we don't have active air conditioning here. So something like an 8Sleep makes me sleep comfortably in any temperature, and if you have a partner, your partner can set that temperature independently, so you both have your optimal sleeping environment, hopefully. I really love it. If you want the best discount possible, I have an affiliate link up here or down here, but it is quite expensive. So if you're only interested in the sleep stage tracking, the Apple Watch is actually quite a good option. Even if you get an older Apple Watch SE, for instance, you get the same sleep stage tracking as you get with a newer Apple Watch 9 or Apple Watch Ultra. The Oura Ring is also quite decent at sleep stage tracking, and there's also the dedicated Nucoa or Sleep 2 app. And in the second tier of devices, we have the Whoop strap, which is still pretty good. And in addition, different Google products, which all use the same sleep stage tracking algorithm. That includes the Google Pixel Watch, but also different Fitbit devices. So you can choose any of these and it will give you more or less the same sleep stage tracking. So if you just want to track maybe your total time in bed, a rough indication of your sleep quality, then the Vivoactive 6 could be good enough. But if you want detailed sleep staging, then no Garmin device will suit that particular need. Garmin is really more a sports watch and not so much a health device, at least based on the quality of some of the sleep stage measurements. However, one thing Garmin is generally very good at is GPS tracking. So tracking your location, your pace, all these kinds of things. So let's see how the Vivoactive 6 did. Because I recently reviewed the Garmin Forerunner 970 and this had great GPS tracking, but this also has a better GPS module than the Vivoactive 6. So let's see how big that difference is. And the way we'll test the GPS tracking performance is by cycling the same route several times. And first of all, checking how quickly the signal is acquired, and second, checking how consistent the different signals are. And if they're very consistent, GPS tracking is likely very good. However, if they're very deviant, it's very likely that the GPS tracking performance just isn't that great. And here I cycled the same route 3 times to work, always starting my route on the corner right here. Well, one time I actually started it somewhere else, but 2 times I started it here on the corner, and you can see that the signal was acquired almost instantly, though not perfectly accurate on this corner right here, but still acquired quickly, and that's the most important thing. Let's now check if those signals are very consistent or not. And here they're already getting a bit better, but they're definitely deviating a bit here in the beginning. This isn't the best performance out of Garmin devices I've seen. Here it's getting pretty good, some deviation. Also here not perfect, but pretty okay. Here again we have some deviation when I had to stop in front of this traffic light right here. This looks okay, though not quite as good as we've sometimes seen for some Garmin devices. Here the consistency is really good, but here again we have some deviation. This definitely isn't true deviation, so right here I am actually on the road, so we have a bit more deviation than I would like to see. Then here it looks pretty okay. These are 2 different routes, so that actually makes sense. That's a real difference between the 2 routes. Some deviation here. Here they're starting to be a bit more consistent. And then here going along the route is looking pretty okay. Definitely not perfect, not as good as for instance the Forerunner 970, which has all system plus multiband, which is not something that the Vivoactive 6 has. But here we're getting super consistent. This is also an easier area, but right here the signals are basically on top of each other. Then going along the route, looking pretty okay. Some deviation, but here still really good. So I don't know if with time it actually got better or if this is just an easier part to track. And then right here, it's also pretty consistent. Overall, at least in the second part of the ride, looking pretty good. The first part was a bit more deviant. Still, compared to much of the competition, this is still pretty solid, though not quite as good as the higher end Garmin models, at least not based on my experience. So overall, pretty decent GPS tracking, not the absolute best, but again, for the price, pretty good. So that's my data-driven review of the Garmin Vivoactive 6. I'm actually quite happy with the overall performance for the price. That's sort of the general message of this review. You can definitely get better devices, also better Garmin devices than the Vivoactive 6. However, they tend to be much more expensive. So if you're looking to get into the Garmin ecosystem and you don't want the most premium price tag, then I can definitely recommend the Vivoactive 6. But there are some caveats there. If you want really good heart rate tracking, then I recommend adding an ECG chest strap. You can probably get an okay one for about 40-50 bucks or so, which is again an added cost, but you will get the most reliable heart rate tracking out there, even more reliable than a built-in heart rate sensor of the most expensive Garmin device. Second, don't trust the sleep stages. I mean, this is true for any Garmin device. The Vivoactive 6 has the same sleep stage tracking as much more expensive devices. So again, not a reason to get a more expensive Garmin device. Basically any sports watch brand I've tested, so Garmin, Chorus, also Suunto and Polar. My Suunto review might be out before or after this, but all of them just don't have good sleep stage tracking. They just haven't invested the money, it's just not their thing. So other Garmin devices or other particular sports watches will not give you better sleep stage tracking than this Vivoactive 6. And the GPS tracking is pretty solid. This is the only reason I would really recommend getting a more expensive device than the Vivoactive 6. So for instance, a new Forerunner 570 or 970 will definitely give you more reliable pacing, for instance, during your run. So if that is your goal, then you might want to spend a few €100 extra, get that more reliable GPS tracking. However, for the casual athlete, I don't know if it's worth it. Actually quite like the small size of this device. I have relatively narrow wrists, so for me this is actually a good fit. Yes, you get an older screen, smaller screen, not the latest sort of OS of Garmin. However, do you really need that? Would you notice a difference if you didn't see a more expensive one next to it? I'm not sure. It's really up to you in the end. What is your goal with this device? And do you want to treat yourself to a more expensive device, or potentially you actually need it? But I think for many people it's just sort of that extra luxury that you buy that you might not need. So it depends on your priorities. What do you want to spend your money on? Now, if you do decide to get the Garmin Vivoactive 6, the Forerunner 970, a Whoop strap, an 8 sleep pod, an Oura ring, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, you want to support the channel and potentially save a lot of money, I would check my affiliate links down below, which often give you the best deal possible. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Garmin Vivoactive 6, I think you will like this video on the Garmin Forerunner 970 or this video on what are the best sleep stage trackers out there.